Visionary. By Douglas Milewski. Elemental P. United States. Copyright 2016 by Douglas Milewski. All rights reserved. Chapter 6. Joe showed up the Thursday after that. This time I knew that there would be no picnic. He took me straight to the Baroness for a talking to. The weather had improved somewhat since my day out with Cymbeline, this particular day striving for indescribably beautiful. Meanwhile Joe talked. I don't know what it is about you writer guys. I mean you write, you know what I mean? But then you don't write. Here I am, I can talk, you know, and everyone knows that I can talk, you know, and so I ought to be able to write. I ought to be able to do like you. So I sat down with Cymbeline one night and I made up a story about pirates and treasure and sailing ships. All the good stuff, you know? And so she reads it back to me and it's not right. Yeah, I know that I said all that stuff, but there was more stuff to add. Then she reads it back to me again and it's still not right. So I did this for a week and showed it to a guy. What do you call those guys? Like baseball. An agent. The agent, he owes me some big favors and he looks at me and he says, Joe, I owe you big. I owe you so big that you need to hear this. I can't sell this. Spurting blood is frowned upon. And I say, I can change that. So he shakes his head and tells me how there can't be any good stuff in the story at all. After that I stopped talking to the bastard. Well, with you being around and all, I found what Cymbeline had typed up for me and he was right. It was just awful. So I figure, I'm smart enough to stop when I'm licked, right? You, I don't understand. You don't stop when you're licked. It's like you don't even know you've been kicked to the curb. I laughed at that. It's a madness. The white paper mesmerizes you. Like voodoo? Yeah, it's the white man's voodoo. You stare at a piece of paper until a hallucination comes out, then you write it down. Is that it? I'm gonna have to try that sometime. The road ended too soon. Joe turned onto Mrs. Paget's property. Some flowers were out, but as I can't tell flowers apart, I can't tell you what they were. Joe took me in the front door this time. I found her house very pleasant but empty without all the people in it. The furniture tried to fill the space, but all it did was to provide artful clutter and plenty of dusting for the maid. I'm sure that the maid wasn't grateful. A moment later, Joe opened the library door, gesturing me in. Mrs. Paget sat there ever so properly, smiling ever so gently. This time those clever eyes worked against me. My dear John, I am quite disappointed in you. You have broken my heart. I've given you time to give me a story, and what you have given me is unacceptable. My boys' magazine publishes bi-weekly. I need stories promptly and frequently. Money is worth less every day. I am not looking for literary genius. I am merely looking to change the public conversation. I will have what I want. What must I do to get acceptable writing from you? I shrugged. I didn't know the answer. It was a busy few weeks. The Baroness folded her hands. That meant that she had made her decision, and I would now listen. I believe that you need a change of venue. I'll send you to one of my properties. Clear your mind of troubles. Right. I'll assign Cymbeline to keep tabs on you. She's a very good typist. She had already been keeping tabs on me. Some parts of this relationship were getting obvious. And Mr. Johnson, do produce for me. Do not discover the limitations of my kindness. I had no intention of doing that. The Baroness is like the first teacher that you had in school. There's something in her that you absolutely love, and you never ever want to disappoint her. All the discipline in the world motivated you less effectively than her sadness. The Baroness had something to add before sending me away. I also understand that I preempted your date with Cymbeline. She does look forward to seeing you, so I had the cook make you a bit of something special. The little something that the cook made for us was beef Wellington served in the Baroness's dining room. In addition to the beautiful plates, the butler set out an arsenal of silverware, to what purpose I could not fathom. When do you really need more than one fork? Does it really go bad between servings? So what exactly is the Baroness doing with me? Cymbeline assessed me before I answered, as if saying the wrong thing were dynamite. You're coming to live with us. The penthouse of the building is empty. It's a little plain, but it should be just perfect for writing. Over the winter I kept it empty and used it as a greenhouse, so you'll have to put up with Charlie's herbs and a few tomatoes. In those days, the penthouse was where you didn't want to live. The well-to-do lived on the lowest floors. Getting the penthouse was no compliment, especially in a building without an elevator. What about my things? Joe's already gone to get them, but they don't matter. Charlie went shopping for you. You'll have a whole new wardrobe. You'll look very writerly. Cymbeline toasted me with champagne. Somehow that made me forget all the artificiality. The apartment building turned out to be at the top of Nelson Hill. With no elevator, getting to the penthouse meant walking up and down 10 flights of steps. I think that the Baroness arranged that on purpose. Presumably I would be too lazy to walk up and down those stairs, so would decide to write instead. The penthouse itself was a wall of glass on one side and a blank wall on the other. It featured a gas stove, a radiator, and a bathroom. The table folded up to let the bed down. Other than that, I had brown walls with no redeeming charm. I must admit, the view from up here was something to see. From the top of Nelson Hill you could see all of the city, including a skyscraper being built down near the banks. One new building would have 30 stories. If that sounds like a lot of stories, there was a building going up in New York that was 80 stories and would be the world's highest. Personally, I had no idea why such a building made any sense, yet somebody with money thought it was needed. In that way, money is more powerful than faith. Spend enough of it, and you can move any mountain that you want. Over to the east, across the harbor, were some burned-out buildings. At first I wanted to blame the communists, but they usually seize buildings for themselves. No, that burned-out section had to be from Fiat Lux, who ranked up there with the KKK for their degree of inflexible obstinance. That's not to say that the communists were above reproach, because they weren't, but they sometimes had enough sense to not pee in their own beds. Fiat Lux failed to grasp that much. Our country had some unique communists as communists go. Unlike the old world communists, who seemed determined to create a new imperial order on top of their old imperial order, the Free States Communist Party seemed determined to create a new conflicted order based on the old conflicted order. Put any two of them in one room, and you'd be lucky to get them to agree on the same spelling. As far as I was concerned, we couldn't overthrow them soon enough. In hindsight, I'm not sure that they were any more clueful than our corporate communists, who believed that the nation should print enough money to buy everybody. With ownership, the profits go to the state, but conveniently the bonuses still went to the managers. Predictably, bonuses now ate up all the profits in state corporations. Leave it to the free states to capitalize on communism. I also had my own bathroom. I cannot tell you how odd that was. I had never had my own bathroom. I had always shared bathrooms with my family, my grandmother, my sister, the Clarks, the army, and whatever boarding house that I lived in. The idea that I could simply walk into that room, sit down, read the paper, and never hear a knock simply dumbfounded me. At least I had the tomato plants. They felt like roommates. That felt more comfortable to me than being up there alone. The best part was that they didn't try to talk to me. The bookshelves contained one last gift, all the books written by Blavatsky and Leadbeater. There was all the theosophy that I could ever want. Charlie woke me in the morning, which I had not expected, rousing me from bed. He handed me some overalls and a beagle. The beagle seemed to think this normal. After I dressed, but before I walked the beagle, Charlie showed me the janitor closets. Joe filled in the details. These bums who live here mess up the floors all the time. We don't appreciate that. We work hard to make this place livable. Everybody works. Now I figure that you don't want to shovel coal, so you get to sweep and mop every morning. Just like the army. All 10 floors. Easy enough. I was dubious about this arrangement, especially the beagle. Why me? The Baroness wants me writing. Joe jabbed a finger at me. 'Cause Cymbeline's gotta take care of you, and I gotta go drive for the Baroness. Charlie ain't gonna do this all himself, Bird. You do good, and I'll take you with me to the dog races. Oh, and welcome to communism. Joe tossed his cigar onto the floor and wandered off. We're down there, he said, pointing through the floor. It's the only door across from the front door, so you can't miss it. Some jokers just aren't funny. Joe wasn't funny. When I was small, my family lived in a company house in a textile town. Grandma and my sisters slept in one room. My brothers and I slept in another. My parents slept in the living room. That may sound tight, but other families fit just as many people into even fewer rooms. Dad kept trying to get us a larger house, but he needed to get promoted for that, and to get the promotion he needed to be an Anglican. The only thing standing in his way was my grandmother's insistence that we attend the Catholic Church. No family of hers was going to lose its faith and be damned to hell for attending a Protestant church. Her stubborn faith left everyone in the family unhappy and no one better off. She wouldn't have changed her mind short of the Virgin Mary shedding tears of blood. My scholarship proved the family's blessing. As my grandmother insisted on going with me to school, the social hindrance of her religion left with her. My father got his promotion in the mill and he moved into a foreman's house. My mother was proud of having her own bedroom, insisting that they buy a proper bedroom set. When I visited that house for holidays, I was now the one who slept in the living room, woken every night by Dad returning from the saloon. When I went to school, I was too young to stay in the dormitories on campus, so I boarded with my grandmother in a flat on Duncan Street. We had just enough room for a desk, a table, and a bed that we shared. My grandmother only read 2 books in those years as she waited for me during class, the Roman Catholic Bible and St. Augustine's City of God. Her Latin was rather poor and she struggled greatly with each, but she would not accept my help. From that experience, I falsely concluded that my grandmother was simply unable to acquire foreign languages, but that proved incorrect. Only after her death did I learn that she spoke Flemish flawlessly, having learned it during one of my grandfather's deployments. As there was no Catholic church in town, we did not attend church at all. Now I was a janitor in a high-rise apartment. Compared to my previous living situations, this penthouse seemed luxurious. The walls kept out the wind and the roof mostly kept out the rain, and I didn't have to share it with anyone. I could ask for little more. Once I got into mopping, Joe was right. Mopping was just like the army. You relax and work with it. I liked to mop the top floor first and go down the stairs to mop the next hallway. Eventually I found myself on the first floor where I dumped out my pail, then trudged back up all those flights. If I could have forgotten myself in that place, truly lost myself in that way that the Buddhists talk about, I could have been happy. That place was good for putting my mind on to simmer so that my creative pot could cook, while the front of my brain complained, wondering how soon all this monotonous torture would be done. The front only wanted to hop a train out of town. The funny thing about labor is that your brain likes working as much as your body. As I cleaned and scrubbed that floor with the beagle keeping me company, I cleaned and polished parts of my own head that were caked and jammed with dirt. Disused parts began working again. Cluttered areas became usable. For the first time in a long time, I could see something beyond my own immediate survival. I would write about a church inspector. That idea came to me so simply that it pleased me. The subversion in this approach was total and complete. What censor would say no to a church inspector hunting down wizards? Using knowledge of wizardly techniques and explaining those techniques to the audience, he would track down the not-so-bad guys and unmask them for what they were, ordinary people. As he did this, the kids would learn about wizardry. They would learn what it could do, what it couldn't do, and some of the discipline needed to do it. In short, I would demystify the profession. At that point, I didn't know enough theosophical elements to write a story, so I would put those elements in later as I learned them. Despite sounding like genius, the idea did not come fully formed. I played with any number of scenarios about the inspector, none of which I remember now. After some time I decided that he needed some sort of assistant, someone my readers could relate to, such as a boy of the same age. He would follow and learn from the inspector. As for the inspector, I structured him after the dry and irascible Professor Eugene Clark. After my grandmother had died, and after the disastrous supervision of my sister, I had moved in with Professor Clark's family and acted as his assistant. Clark himself was an expert in the hill culture, the builders of those strange mounds in the interior, and the likely creators of that calamity which made the interior nigh uninhabitable. Professor Clark was himself a student of the legendary Woodbine McCune. An adventurous spirit, McCune had lived in the interior for years, studying the mounds, the storms, the tornadoes, and the ley lines that connected them. After his untimely death, Clark took over the study of McCune's extensive artifacts and notes. I missed meeting that great man by 5 months. I had expected full access to those artifacts, but I now know that Clark had kept me at arm's length, jealously guarding his work from me. As far as he was concerned, I was a rival. Not knowing any better, I trusted him as a mentor, all the while being shunted into writing articles on the most useless topics. He's the one who shunted me into computational thaumaturgy. In every way he broke his professional obligations to me. In the rare case when I did pull something useful from a useless topic, Clark changed the authorship to himself while I earned no credit. That may sound terrible to you, but at the time that was business as usual. Did you really think that Edison invented all those things by himself? My anger drove my floor cleaning, and my floor cleaning drove my story. I had ideas in my head, and I needed paper. After putting away my mop and broom and dropping the beagle on the bed for a well-deserved nap, I filled my pen and began my story, writing out my ideas on typing paper. The inspector treated all his young pupils with the same stern unfairness and harsh expectations that a drill sergeant gives his soldiers. He was never a man of gentle words. On gaining his newest pupil, the umpteenth son of yet another high official, he gave no quarter. He looked the lad in the eye and began educating him even before he knew the boy's name. I investigate magic, young man. I'm sure that sounds exciting and romantic to you. Well, it isn't. There's nothing romantic about it. You are too caught up in the mystery of it all, too likely to stand in wonder at magic, rather than crushing its neck until it gives up its secrets to you. I am a church inspector, and my job is to follow up on occurrences of magic in this city. I cannot afford mystification. Mystification will kill me. Let them, the ordinary man and woman, be mystified. That's good. They won't try to do magic. But me, I need to know what is going on in a wizard's head. I need to understand the mechanics of what they do. I need to be able to read the evidence of their deeds to figure out who they are and what they are about. I expect the same discipline out of you. As you travel with me, I will demystify the magical for you. I will give you formulas and theories, techniques and rules of thumb. Only by rational thought can we lay the wizard low, showing all the world the archaisms that those charlatans are. They have rules, not morals. They care nothing for the welfare of their fellow man, but it's that welfare that matters most. Communism, not magic, is the way forward in this world. There it was. That began the boy's story. Nobody had a name. The boy really didn't matter. He was there so that ordinary boys would see the world as he did. The real work lay in the inspector. Would this get past the censors? At that moment I doubted both my own ability to write such a story and the Baroness's commitment to the stories. Those doubts stayed my pen and left me staring at the page. Annoyed by this, I skipped over to the next scene in my head. The inspector said, "This is the scene of the crime. What do you see, boy?" The boy looked at the scorched concrete, still smelling of something, unsure. "I see a bunch of burn marks." The boy hesitated again, looking to the inspector to see if he had answered the question correctly. By the look on the inspector's face, he had answered all wrong. "Have you learned nothing from me? Look carefully. These are not mere burn marks. Count them. These were made by overloading crystals. You can see the splaying pattern from their burnout. You can count the marks. They go in a circle. That tells you a great deal about the type of magic being performed. My guess is that they used quartz crystals. They're cheap and easy to work with. That tells me the person here was an amateur. Tell me again, what is the basic unit of magic?" "I don't know," the boy confessed. "But you must always know. This is your life. Those madmen out there don't care that your father is somebody important. They will destroy you for getting in their way. You must learn once. If you do not learn, I will return you to your father. Do you understand?" "Yes," said the boy. "Good." The basic unit of magic was established by Isaac Newton in his Principia Alchemiae. He called it the dictum after the first word that God spoke in Genesis. The average human produces 1 dictum per second. Magical energy has a few more aspects. Dicta per second is called flow. That's how quickly magical energy moves from one point to another. Think of that as pouring water down a pipe. The bigger the pipe, the more flow. Finally, magic has emphasis, or how emphatically the dictum wants to move from one point to another. It's like water pressure. Quartz crystals can handle a flow of about 5 dicta per second. Over that, they overheat and fail. Quartz can also handle a moderate amount of emphasis. By the way that these crystals were destroyed, we know that a large amount of dicta moved through this system, far more than what one person could handle. So the purpose of this system must have been to disperse the dicta. I believe that this rogue wizard set up this circle to catch a teleporting item. Due to being on a rotating planet, when the item arrived, it arrived with excess angular momentum. The catcher, the person receiving the teleport, used the crystals as an energy sink, absorbing all the energy of the transfer, much like firemen using a net to catch a person jumping from a building. If he hadn't dampened the angular momentum, the object would have acted like a cannonball. Logic, young man. With logic and education, you can read the crime. We now know that we are looking at some type of smuggling. Do you think that those workmen knew that? Of course not. That's why we're special. Our knowledge sets us apart. We vie with brilliant men while they need never see. Did I like that? I liked it enough. There was a story there waiting to be told. The teleportation parts were simplified, as real teleportation takes an absurd amount of math. A professional is more likely to wind up with a cannonball than a success. Meanwhile, catchers are extremely touchy constructions with a high failure rate. I had published papers on both, arguing for more research in this area. Clark had pushed me into a new direction. I wish that reliable teleportation was true because it would give wizards an invaluable skill and save the profession, but there are simply too many calculations required too quickly to make teleportation practical. A computational engine like Babbage developed, only far more complicated and orders of magnitude faster, would be needed to coordinate all the details. Was this the kind of story that the Baroness wanted? Would she accept it? That really didn't matter. What mattered was getting past the censors. Once I could do that, I could push boundaries. When I showed it to her, Cymbeline wrapped her hand around my wrist. Cold hands. The boy's name should be Sean. It's like John but not so stuffy sounding. The inspector needs a very patriotic name. Who was that general in the tax insurrection? Washington. Name him Washington. Adam Washington, so it's more biblical. Yes, I like that. I like that too. Getting the right name made all the difference in a story. From there I pushed on, hacking out the piece over the course of the day. Having seen the abuses that wizards committed upon others and upon themselves, I knew all the inside scuttlebutt to write about. The people would see my wizards, and they would know them for their petty ambitions and their cruel intentions, yet also see them for their idealistic ambitions and good intentions. Each and every story would be a study in everything that I had seen go wrong as well as right. That night, as I lay down so tired that I could hardly move, I lay awake despite my exhaustion, my mind fixated on my memory of Cymbeline playing the piano, her fingers repeating the same phrase endlessly. Unable to sleep, I walked about the corridors for a while, shadowy under their inadequate light bulbs. Some needed replacing, so I resolved to grab a few before I mopped the floors again. While standing at the front door watching the street, I heard an unfamiliar voice from inside 101 cry out in terror, followed by Joe's familiar voice softened, tending the sobs. That terrified voice must have been Charlie's. Cymbeline would eventually tell me about it. Every few nights he would awaken from a nightmare, screaming for his life at the top of his lungs. I don't know what happened to Charlie during the war, but it must have been terrible. I've researched such people since then, and that sort of behavior is normal. War is not the gung-ho stories that I used to read in storybooks or imagine in my play adventures. War is the kind of thing that leaves you screaming for your life 20 years later, and you were the lucky one who didn't die because you threw yourself down to the right rather than to the left. I suppose that in a way those who screamed had lost a limb, but they had lost a psychic limb, some part of their inside that we can't see, and that no amount of stitches and bandages can ever fix. If you gave me the ability to abolish war, I would happily do so for the sake of my own conscience and my own brotherhood. I understood living in perpetual terror. Sometimes when he napped in the car I heard Charlie mutter strange words, so I wondered if he was at Ypres. The more that I saw of him, the more that I was convinced. How could I not feel sorry for the man? The only ones who came out of Ypres with their psyches intact were the cowards who hid their eyes and the almost dead who couldn't see anyway. Half the casualties from that fiasco were from suicides. I wrapped up 2 stories on Tuesday. The inspector caught his woman in 5,000 words, but I still didn't have a crime. That may sound amazing, but these stories were for a boys' weekly magazine, not for the Saturday Evening Post. The crime itself was incidental. Most motivations boiled down to money, power, or desperation. Cymbeline sat down with my notes that night and typed them up at some unholy rate that only typists can do. Not only did she type fast, she corrected my spelling and punctuation by sight. Those sorts of typists didn't come cheap. The Baroness had to be paying her well. Is there anything else that you can do? Shorthand. As I washed the dishes after dinner, I had time to think before I wrote out the final pages of the story. A woman was receiving illegally printed magical tomes and trying to distribute them. She was vainly preserving the magical tradition, even though it was not worth saving. The cruel truth was that no one wanted what she had to give. The inspector apprehended her with all her shunned literature because the people would not be fooled again. In my own belief, there was no magical tradition worth saving any more than there was a horse and buggy business worth saving. With the arrival of the motor car, the wagon business was doomed. In the same way, with the arrival of ever-increasing technology, the position of the wizard was doomed. No more did you need a cabal of well-educated wizards to blast the enemy from afar. No, now all you needed was a mass-manufactured gun and a few well-trained gunners. No more did you need signalers, wizards who could hear what was said from far away. With telegraphy and radio, you had telegraphers and radio operators who could be trained in months. Those people did not need to spend 20 years hidden away to learn a complicated art. How long before movies spoke of their own accord? How long before machines could learn? How long before machines could transmit images? I didn't know the answers to those questions at the time, but I did know the answer, eventually. The facts on the table were plain math, and I could add better than most. What is a wizard in a world that does not need him? He's just another man who will take a job for a paycheck. Another dishwasher. So the irony was that after I had left the profession, I was still blazing a new path for my peers, mine being a path that none of them wanted to take. I washed floors and washed dishes.